Do you remember the first time you diagnosed a carburation-related problem? It might have been last year or 20 years ago. Whenever it was probably frustrating and resulted in a lot of wasted time. Briggs and Stratton recognizes that many new technicians struggle with understanding the variety of carburetors they're exposed to on a daily basis. Even seasoned technicians still struggle with carburation-related concerns. Many technicians have diagnostic tools in their arsenal. Using those tools effectively can reduce the equipment service time. However, those aren't the only things you need for diagnostic work. You also need experience, a clear understanding of what the symptoms of the problem are, and knowledge about what causes them. During this update, we're going to list the common symptoms that cause warranty and service-related issues for carburetors. Then we'll investigate the many causes of those symptoms. To help us better understand carburetors, let's review the 4 cycles of a properly running engine and carburetor.
4 elements are required in an internal combustion engine to allow it to run. Those elements are air, fuel, compression, and spark. Air and fuel enter the engine through the carburetor. It's the job of the carburetor to supply a mixture of air and fuel that will allow proper combustion. During the intake stroke, the intake valve between the carburetor and combustion chamber opens. This allows atmospheric pressure to force the air-fuel mixture into the cylinder bore as the piston moves downward. Just after the piston reaches the bottom of its travel, or bottom dead center, the cylinder bore contains as much air-fuel mixture as possible. The intake valve closes, and the advancing piston returns back up the cylinder bore. This is the compression stroke. The air-fuel mixture is compressed between the piston and cylinder head. When the piston reaches the top of its travel, called top dead center, the air-fuel mixture will be at its optimum ignitability point. A very high voltage is created in the ignition coil. The spark plug enables this high voltage to be discharged into the combustion chamber. The heat created by the spark ignites the gases, creating rapidly expanding superheated gases, forcing the piston down the cylinder bore during the power stroke. When the piston reaches bottom dead center again, the exhaust valve opens. As the piston travels back up the cylinder bore, it forces the spent combustion gases through the exhaust valve and out of the exhaust system. As the piston returns to top dead center, the exhaust valve closes. The intake valve opens, and the 4 cycles repeat.
Now that we've reviewed a properly functioning engine and carburetor, let's list the most common symptoms that can cause carburation, warranty, and servicing issues. A. The engine will not start. B. The engine is hard to start. C. The engine starts, but will not idle. D. The engine starts and idles, but will not run properly at top no load. E. The engine starts and idles, but shows slight hesitation with possible stalling while performing light to moderate work. F. The engine starts and idles, but will not run under load. G. The engine starts, idles, runs at top no load and under load, but stops running after a short period of time. H. Engine oil dilution occurs when the engine is not running. And I. Engine oil dilution occurs only when engine is running. Now that we have a list of common carburetor symptoms, let's analyze the cause and effects related to each one. The systematic approach of troubleshooting displays well on a flowchart. Following a well-designed flowchart can make problem-solving nearly effortless. It's similar to using a road map, because each time you come to an intersection, you have to decide where to go next. With a flowchart, you base your decisions on the diagnostic tools, your own experience, or advice from a more experienced technician. From here on in, we'll use our carburetor symptoms to build a detailed carburetor diagnostics flowchart, which should make solving future carburetor problems easy. A carburetor is a mechanical device that combines fuel and air. The fuel and air are usually metered and mixed. It stands to reason, then, that problems will typically be with the mechanical nature of the device and/or with the delivery of fuel and air in the proper proportions. Carburetors use fresh fuel, clean air, and up to 4 moving mechanical parts. The mechanical parts are choke shaft, if equipped, throttle shaft, float, and inlet needle and seat. If any of these are unable to perform their function, the carburetor will fail to perform properly. Following a systematic diagnostic approach is important. It's important to check and verify each step. We've made some presumptions for this program that a thorough quick check has been performed, such as fresh fuel is present, the choke operates as it should, etc. With this in mind, let's get started. In our first example, the symptom is A. The engine will not start. Dirt and debris has been and continues to be the #1 problem for carburetors. We need to better understand what dirt or debris is and where and how it enters the carburation system. Dirt is a natural substance that can find its way into the carburetor through the air intake or dislodged gaskets. Dirt can also enter through the fuel system when the customer removes the gas cap, or directly from a contaminated supply tank. Depending on the type of fuel filter being used and the size of the particles of dirt, the carburetor may never be affected. Now that we understand what dirt is, let's look at debris. Debris is an unnatural substance, such as plastic, rubber, or metal shavings. When material other than fuel is found within a fuel system, making a distinction as to what the material is and where it was found can aid in establishing how it got there. Sometimes the type of material can even establish who is at fault. For instance, small black plastic chips found plugging a fuel inlet on a brand new lawnmower featuring a black plastic fuel tank may place the blame on the manufacturer. Non-professional servicing practices such as dirty repair benches or using bolts to plug fuel lines will cause dirt or debris to enter the system. It's like a surgeon who doesn't wash his hands before an operation. A carburetor repair bench should always be kept clean. Fuel line clamps should be used when disconnecting any fuel lines. Fuel filters can control some of the dirt and debris that enters the fuel system during equipment usage. Briggs & Stratton has always offered a fuel filter with its engines. Ultimately, original equipment manufacturers decide what fuel filter will or will not be used on the application, with the exception of most Briggs & Stratton fuel tanks that come standard with fuel filters. Fuel filters are rated by the size of debris the filter will not allow through the filter median. This measurement is referred to as micron size. There are 25,400 microns in 1 inch. By comparison, an average human hair is 40 to 300 microns thick. If passing debris is smaller than the smallest orifice in the carburetor, it won't cause a problem, unless enough fine particulates pass through the fuel filter and coagulate in the carburetor passageways. Eventually, it could cause an obstruction, similar to an obstructed artery in the human heart. When the fuel filter becomes clogged with dirt, debris, or water, the flow of fuel will stop and not let the fuel through. If dirt or debris in the fuel manages to flow through the filter, it will end up in the carburetor bowl. If the dirt or debris lodges in the main jet, the fuel cannot flow up the high-speed circuit to start the engine. Other symptoms that can occur with a clogged or partially blocked main jet are F. The engine starts and idles but will not run under load, and G. The engine starts, idles, runs at top no-load speed and under load, but stops running after a short period of time. The flow charts for these two symptoms follow very similar paths. If dirt or debris partially blocks the main jet while the engine is running and a load is applied, the carburetor cannot supply enough fuel to keep the engine running. Known also as a loss of power, the engine stops running and the dirt falls away from the main jet, resulting in the customer being able to once again start the engine. The customer can continue performing some work until the dirt once again becomes temporarily lodged in the main jet. This cycle will repeat itself until the dirt becomes permanently lodged in the main jet, causing a permanent no-start symptom. Let's look at symptom C next. The engine starts but will not idle, resulting in a pronounced hunting and surging. This symptom is the result of dirt or debris lodging in the fuel idle circuit. The dirt or debris can be introduced from the fuel tank system or an external bowl vent. Remember, the external bowl vent is typically not filtered since there is very little airflow. If the idle fuel passageway is completely clogged, the engine may try to stall. Then, as the engine begins to coast down, the governor spring opens the throttle plate. This is a normal function for the governor spring. As the governor spring opens the throttle plate, the low pressure area moves above the main nozzle. This causes a shot of fresh fuel to enter the carburetor and engine speed increases. The result is hunting and surging. To override the governor, simply hold the throttle plate closed to force the engine to idle. If the engine continues to run, you know there's a problem with the governor system, and you would need to troubleshoot the governor. If the engine stalls, you need to inspect the fuel supply route to the idle circuit. The smallest fuel orifice in most float feed style carburetors is the idle circuit pilot jet. These carburetors can have an idle air orifice size as small as 24 thousandths of an inch, and an idle fuel pilot jet orifice as large as 2 1/2 thousandths of an inch. An otoscope is a great diagnostic tool to help see those small orifices and reinforce your learning experience. Dirt and debris entering through a ripped or torn air cleaner can collect in the idle air circuit, causing it to become clogged before the pilot jet. When this occurs, the pilot jet will only flow raw fuel to the combustion chamber at idle, resulting in light black smoke exiting the exhaust. The carburetor will mildly hunt and surge due to this symptom. If the carburetor has an idle mixture screw, you can use it as a diagnostic tool. While the engine is running, adjust the idle mixture screw until the engine runs smoothly. Shut off the engine, and while turning the idle mixture screw in until it bottoms out, count the number of turns. If the idle mixture screw was less than 1 turn out, there's a good chance the idle air circuit is clogged. Now let's go back to symptom B. The engine is hard to start. A choke-style carburetor exhibits harder starting when the high-speed air circuit is clogged. The high-speed air bleed acts as a vent to allow the fuel to be drawn up the emulsion tube. When dirt or debris enters the high-speed air circuit, it stops the airflow from reaching the emulsion tube. The carburetor cannot mix the air and fuel when the engine is trying to start or when the engine is under a heavy workload. The visual sign of a clogged high-speed air circuit under load will be black smoke from the exhaust and a possible loss of power. Most carburetors require the ability to handle light to moderate workloads. If those passages become partially or totally clogged, the carburetor symptoms can be similar. Let's take a moment to identify those carburetor symptoms and then follow the diagnostic flowchart. D. The engine starts and idles but will not run properly at top no-load speed. E. The engine starts and idles but shows slight hesitation with possible stalling when light loads are applied. Dirt and debris can enter the transition ports 3 different ways, resulting in similar symptoms. The first path is when dirt or debris enters the idle air bleed and mixes with the fuel in the pilot jet. The dirt or debris continues to the transition ports behind the small round Welch plug. When the transition ports become partially or fully blocked, the engine will hesitate when the engine is under a light to moderate load. The second path is when dirt or debris enters from the fuel system, such as the fuel tank, and then into the carburetor bowl. The final entryway can be the carburetor bowl's vent. The bowl vent does not experience a high volume of moving air. However, the bowl vent is exposed to the environment around the carburetor, so dirt and debris could enter the carburetor bowl. The 2 last symptoms that occur are engine oil dilution occurs when engine is not running, and engine oil dilution occurs when engine is running. These symptoms, H and I, can be the easiest to identify and fix. In some cases, you need to educate the customer on how to use the equipment. Many of you have had a customer tell you they had a gusher when checking the oil. When they removed the oil fill cap, oil poured up and out of the hole, as if the engine had mysteriously increased its oil volume. Of course, no engine adds its own oil. even though that's what some customers may describe. The symptom of oil dilution when the engine is not running is typically caused by dirt or debris becoming wedged between the carburetor's needle and seat. It can also be caused by the float hinge pin sticking, or a defective or misadjusted float. When this occurs, it allows the fuel to continually flow through the carburetor intake manifold, through the intake valve, down the cylinder wall, and into the crankcase. This condition is called cylinder wall wash and will eventually cause a failure of the piston rings and cylinder wall. One additional condition that can occur while the engine is not running is float bounce. This occurs when the equipment is transported on a trailer or in the back of a car or truck. If the fuel supply shutoff valve is not turned off, the float can bounce. When the float bounces, it opens the needle and seat, allowing unwanted fuel into the carburetor bowl. When enough fuel overfills the bowl, the excess fuel migrates to the crankcase. A quick and easy fix is to install a Briggs & Stratton fuel shutoff valve in line between the fuel tank and carburetor inlet. The final symptom we're going to look at is when the engine oil dilution occurs only when the engine is running. If at any time the carburetor is not adjusted correctly, causing a rich running condition, the extra fuel will not all be burned. This results in oil dilution, and in some cases, when an engine is cold and not allowed to properly warm up before it's shut down, unburned fuel vapors will gather and condense in the crankcase. We've even seen twin-cylinder engines that have been run for months, if not years, on one cylinder, resulting in oil dilution failures. A bouncing float can also occur with a running engine. If the equipment is running over rough terrain, the float will bounce. Some fuel inlet needles are designed to compensate for this situation. The needles have small springs on the back where they make contact with the float. These small springs act like small shock absorbers. Diagnosing and repairing carburation-related problems requires more than having the right tools. It's a clear understanding of what the symptoms are and what is supposed to happen when the equipment runs properly. Use a systematic approach of working through the symptom, and you will be successful every time.